Hey guys, tonight we're heading to the heart of Central Asia, to a place whose name alone sounds like a promise of silk, spice, and secrets Samarkand. The air is warm from the day's heat, and the sun hangs low, pouring liquid orange light across a skyline dotted with impossible blue domes. You're standing just inside the city, your sandals crunching against centuries old stone, and you can feel that this evening isn't in a hurry. It wants to stretch itself out like a cat in the sun before giving in tonight. Somewhere to your left, a hawker yells the final discount on pomegranates, his voice half-hearted because he knows you're not buying. The smell of fresh naan, just brushed with sesame, coils toward you in slow, hypnotic ribbons. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm not here to collect pity clicks, I'm here to take you places you'll wish you could stay. And if you're feeling sociable, drop a comment with your location and the local time where you're listening. I love seeing where in the world we're falling asleep together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The city's turquoise-tiled giants, mosques and madrasas catch the last molten light like they've been waiting all day for this one final kiss from the sun. These tiles, laid centuries ago, are hand-painted with patterns so intricate you could get lost in them. Though if you actually try, please don't blame me when you walk into a camel. Historians still argue whether these deep blues were chosen purely for their beauty or to echo the endless sky above the steppe. And yes, you're allowed to think both, while pretending you're more decisive than actual scholars. From here, the Registan square is a bowl of shadow, the air cooling just enough for your skin to notice. You hear the faint clatter of a wooden cartwheel over cobblestones. The last deliveries being made before night. The scent changes too. The heat-baked dust from the day is giving way to the sharper, cooler smell of wet clay walls as the city exhales. Somewhere above, a bird slices through the deepening orange, heading home to a nest in a minaret crack. The domes loom like guardians, each tile catching the day's last embers, then surrendering to indigo. You feel that peculiar slowing, the moment the world shrugs off its daytime urgency. Merchants' voices soften, children vanish indoors, and the shadows stretch themselves lazily until they merge with one another. And right there, leaning against a worn marble pillar, you can almost feel the centuries settle on your shoulders. The Mongol riders who once passed here, the caravans heavy with Persian silk, the mathematicians who mapped the stars not far from where you stand. One mainstream historical fact: this city, during the reign of Timur, was one of the richest and most cosmopolitan in the world, a true crossroads of cultures. Quirky tidbit: some visitors claimed the tiles were so shiny you could use them as a mirror, though you suspect that says more about medieval ego than medieval craftsmanship. The sun's lower now, skimming the horizon, and a hush rolls over the streets like someone has just lowered the world's volume knob. This is your cue to drift deeper into the maze, because night in Samarkand doesn't just fall. It pours in like ink, flooding the alleys, pooling in doorways, and inviting you to see what it hides. You slip into the marketplace just as the energy is shifting, that last, frantic half hour before the stalls shut, when vendors suddenly become poets and salesmen all at once. The fading sunlight paints everything gold, and the shadows of awnings stretch across heaps of dried apricots, nuts, and bolts of cloth so bright they almost seem to hum. The smell here is layered like a spice merchant's dream, cumin and cinnamon elbowing for space with the sugary pull of halva, and somewhere, just faintly, the sharp tang of vinegar from pickled vegetables. A man in a deep red robe waves you over, lifting a melon in one hand as if it's the crown jewel of his entire career. You're not even in the mood for melon, but he's speaking to you in the universal language of "this price is only for you, my friend." which roughly translates to, "You're paying for my storytelling skills, not the fruit." Historians still argue whether medieval Samarkand's bazaars were truly as massive and chaotic as travelers claimed, or whether such accounts were, like this melon, somewhat sweetened for effect. Either way, you can't help imagining Marco Polo himself pushing through these same lanes, muttering about the price of saffron under his breath. A small boy with a wooden tray of steaming flatbread darts past you, the sesame seeds scattering like tiny comets as he navigates the crowd. Somewhere to your right, a coppersmith is giving his hammer one last defiant series of taps before packing up, each strike ringing like a bell over the market hum. Quirky tidbit: in medieval Samarkand, there was a superstition among some traders that counting coins out loud at dusk would invite thieves in the night, so you notice more hand gestures than words as deals are wrapped up. You pause by a stall of bolts of silk in impossible shades of green and gold, the fabric catching what's left of the sunlight. The merchant's eyes glint as he fingers the cloth, launching into a pitch about how the dye is made from crushed pomegranate rinds and something he cryptically calls the whisper of the wind. You're tempted to ask if that's an actual plant or just good marketing, but you let it slide. You're too busy noticing the weight of the day lifting, the way voices drop into a softer register as the evening takes over. The market begins to thin. A stray dog noses at a pile of discarded melon rinds. A woman gathers up her display of ceramic bowls, each painted with swirling blue lines that look suspiciously like the patterns on the domes you saw earlier. And then there's that sound. A series of wooden shutters being pulled closed. A rolling percussion marking the end of the market's heartbeat for the day. But not everyone is done. At one corner, a group of traders huddles over a low table, bargaining for something wrapped in cloth. They lean in so close their foreheads nearly touch, their words slipping into a language you can't place. You wonder, just briefly, if it's a precious gem, a forbidden text, or simply the world's most disappointing raisin cake. Either way, they glance around with the same intensity you've seen in poker players and smugglers. You take one last slow stroll past the spice stalls, letting the colors and scents etch themselves into your mind. The jars are glowing like captured sunsets under the final slant of light. This is the marketplace at its most magical. Too late for the midday frenzy, too early for the full hush of night. The in-between space where everything feels softer, older, and just a little more fragile. By the time you reach the edge of the square, the sun has officially bowed out. The vendors melt away into side streets, the dogs claim their sleeping spots, and somewhere, someone strikes the first lantern match of the night. That's your cue to follow the glow, because Samarkand is just getting ready to change costumes, and you've got the best seat in the house. The first lanterns bloom along the Registan like shy stars, one by one pushing back the darkness in warm golden circles. Brass lampstands, polished so often you could almost check your hair in them, line the edges of the square. Their light spills onto the ground in irregular pools, catching the dust motes as they drift lazily through the air, tiny ghosts of the day refusing to settle. The massive facades of the madrasas rise above you, their mosaics now shifting from jewel-bright to deep, velvety shadows broken by glints of reflected flame. A pair of musicians, perched on a low step earlier, are now packing up their lutes and hand drums. One of them, his beard plaited into two thin braids, gives you a nod that could mean good night or I saw you eyeing the bread earlier. Historians still argue whether the Registan at night was primarily a social gathering place or a more ceremonial space. But looking around, you're convinced it's been both at different times. Tonight, it's a quiet stage between acts. You follow the line of lanterns deeper into the square. Each one is slightly different. Some have cut-out patterns that throw lace-like shadows on the ground. Others are plain and utilitarian, meant to do the job without fuss. Quirky tidbit: some medieval cities actually taxed households based on the brightness of their lanterns, supposedly for public safety. Though you suspect it was also a creative way to encourage people to stay indoors after dark. There's a moment, standing here, when the lantern light hits the blue tiles just right, and they shift in tone from sky to ocean. You almost expect them to ripple, to move with the same slow sway as the hanging silk banners by the madrasa doors. A breeze lifts the edges of your robe and carries with it the faint scent of cardamom, probably from that tea house tucked somewhere in the maze of alleys behind you. Your footsteps sound louder now. The daytime clatter has melted away, and each shift of your sandal on stone echoes off the facades. Somewhere, a cat leaps onto a low wall, its tail flicking in time with your steps, like a reluctant guide who's only here because you're mildly interesting. You pass a doorway half concealed by a carved wooden screen, and for just a second, you glimpse a courtyard lit entirely by lanterns strung overhead. The shadows of pomegranate trees sway gently on the walls, and in the center, a small fountain gurgles lazily. You make a note to come back here, if you're ever lucky enough to find it again in this tangle of streets. The Registan's expanse feels larger now, like the darkness has stretched it. You pause in the middle, the lantern light pooling around you, and take in the symmetry. 3 grand structures facing each other, each one humming with centuries of stories you'll never fully know. The domes above them catch faint hints of moonlight, their patterns softened almost to whispers. This is the kind of night that makes you wonder how many others have stood right here. Traders with aching feet, poets looking for metaphors, guards keeping watch for shadows that move wrong. Maybe even someone like you centuries ago, pausing to admire the way brass and tile conspire to make a simple square feel like the center of the universe. Somewhere, a door shuts softly, and the sound seems to seal the square into its nighttime self. You can feel the pull toward the narrow street that leads out, where the glow of more lanterns promises tea, stories, and maybe a seat where your legs can forgive you for all this walking. You follow the narrow thread of lantern light until it widens into a small courtyard, half hidden behind an arched gate. The sign above the entrance is painted in fading gold leaf, the kind that once screamed prosperity, but now whispers it with a shy smile. You duck your head and step inside, greeted instantly by a waft of steam carrying cardamom, black tea, and something floral you can't place. The tea house is low lit, its ceiling draped with faded silks that shift gently in the breeze from an open window. The floor is a patchwork of worn rugs, each one telling its own long, complicated story of spilled tea and stomped boots. A server in a deep green tunic glides past, balancing a tray of brass teapots and tiny, handleless cups. He moves like someone who has carried more tea than most people will drink in a lifetime. A quiet choreography perfected by repetition. You find a seat on a low bench near the corner, the cushion sighing under your weight like it was expecting you. The table in front of you is etched with looping floral patterns, worn smooth by decades of elbows, dice games, and perhaps the occasional awkward first meeting. Historians still argue whether tea houses in Samarkand were primarily for merchants closing deals, poets trading verses, or locals trading gossip. But from where you sit, it's all happening at once, in the same room, in overlapping whispers. To your left, a cluster of older men are hunched over a game of backgammon, the clack of pieces hitting the board, punctuating their low-voiced debate about, judging by the gesturing, the price of camel feed. Quirky tidbit: In some Central Asian cities, tea houses were informally graded by the strength of their gossip networks, and regulars swore you could solve half your problems here without ever stepping outside. A young poet is reciting something to a friend, his voice soft but intense, like he's trying to seduce the air itself. Every few lines, he glances around to see if anyone's listening. And yes, you are, though you pretend to be deeply fascinated by your teacup. The server returns, setting down a pot of deep amber tea and a small dish of sugar cubes. The steam fogs your vision for a moment, curling up into the lamplight before dissolving into the shadows. The first sip is all heat and spice, enough to make you close your eyes and let the day drain out of your shoulders. Somewhere in the far corner, a trio of musicians has set up, a rhubarb, a hand drum, and a flute. They're not playing yet, just tuning, the soft plucking and tapping, blending with the clink of cups and the rustle of robes. When they do begin, it's almost an accident, a slow winding melody that meanders through the room like a curious cat, never demanding attention but rewarding it if you follow. The air is thick with the warmth of conversation, the quiet pride of a city that knows it's a crossroads of the world. And for a moment, you feel like you're part of that unbroken thread, another traveler adding your weight to the cushions, your breath to the steam, your ear to the low hum of the tea house. The tea house murmurs fade behind you as you step back into the night air, and it's immediately clear that something has shifted. The sound is the first clue. The overlapping voices, footsteps, and distant clatter have given way to a kind of layered quiet, broken only by the occasional bark of a dog or the creak of a wooden shutter. And then it comes, slow and sonorous, spilling from the minarets in waves, the final call to prayer of the day. The adhan floats above the rooftops, its syllables bending around domes and alleys, as if the city itself is holding its breath to listen. You pause without even meaning to. Something about the way the voice carries, not hurried, not pleading, but steady, reminds you that Samarkand's night is as much about ritual as it is about rest. Historians still argue whether the exact melodies of the medieval adhan were standardized or improvised, but what's certain is that its cadence shaped the rhythm of city life as surely as the sun itself. You turn toward the sound, following its echo down a narrower street. Here, the lanterns are sparser, their light catching only small slices of the path. A doorway here, the curve of a wall there. Somewhere above, a strip of sky reveals a scatter of early stars. The scent shifts again, away from the spice and smoke of the tea house towards something cleaner, almost mineral, like wet stone. At the next corner, you find a small mosque tucked behind a row of mud brick homes. Its entrance is framed by a carved wooden door, the kind that looks like it could tell you 100 stories if you just leaned close enough. Worshippers slip inside quietly, sandals left neatly in rows that look like they've been arranged by someone with both patience and an eye for symmetry. Quirky tidbit: in some caravan cities, it was common for travelers to join evening prayers even if they didn't belong to the local faith, partly as a sign of respect and partly because the prayer spaces doubled as some of the safest, most welcoming places in town. You linger near the doorway, not intruding, just letting the sound of soft recitation wrap around you. The words rise and fall, weaving with the faint rustle of robes and the occasional shuffle of bare feet against the woven mats inside. Through the open window, you catch a glimpse of oil lamps casting their steady glow across painted walls, the colors muted but still holding on to their dignity after centuries. When the prayer ends, there's no sudden burst of noise, just a gentle return to motion. A man adjusts his turban, another bends to slip on his sandals, and a small boy, perhaps too young to sit still for long, darts into the street with a grin that could outshine the lanterns. As you move on, the quiet that follows feels different than the one before. as if the city has exhaled in unison and is now ready to sink into the deeper, slower hours of night. The call to prayer may have ended, but its echo still hums in your ears, a reminder that even in the stillest moments, Samarkand's heartbeat is steady and ancient. The path ahead widens, and you catch the unmistakable sound of hooves on stone, slow, deliberate, and coming closer. Somewhere beyond the next turn, the night is about to welcome a new arrival. The hooves arrive first, a measured clop that sounds like someone tapping a slow heartbeat into the stones. Then the rest of the caravan rounds the corner. A file of camels swaying like portable dunes, rope halters creaking, packs swaddled in faded reds and desert browns. Their shadows wobble across the walls in lantern light, tall and improbable, as if the city's alleys have decided to host a puppet show just for you. A handler raises 2 fingers in greeting without breaking stride. His turban is dusted the exact color of the road he's been walking for weeks. You fall in alongside them at a respectful distance, drawn by the soft clinking of brass fittings and the low conversational grumbling that camels do when they feel unamused by physics. The air around the caravan carries a composite smell: leather, dry grass, sun-baked wool, a whisper of cumin, and that mysterious note of "we have crossed 3 countries to get here." One of the younger camels glances back at you with an expression that implies you are interesting but not hay. You take it as a compliment. The alley opens into a broad courtyard enclosed by thick walls. The Sarai, a caravanserai made for this precise moment. Arrivals after dark, travel-weary people, animals with opinions. A watchman perches at the entry tower, lamp in hand, noting faces the way a librarian counts borrowed books. Inside, the ground floor is a ring of arched stables and storerooms. Above them, narrow sleeping cells look out over the courtyard like sleepy birds in a rookery. Mainstream fact for your mental notebook. Across the Silk Road network, caravanserais like this stood roughly a day's journey apart, offering secure lodging, fodder, stables, and trading space. They were the lungs and larders of overland commerce. As the heavy gates ease shut behind the last camel, the courtyard takes on the acoustics of a bowl. Voices gather, magnify, then settle. A stable boy bangs a bucket. A spark jumps from a brazier. Somewhere, water glugs out of a skin into a trough with a sound that makes every animal's ears pivot. The head handler counts off animals with a palm on each shoulder, murmuring names that are unexpectedly grand. Quirky tidbit. Many caravan men truly named their camels, not just Spot, but titles like Sea of Sand, Patient Aunt, and He Who Judges. Some swore that a properly addressed camel walked straighter and spat less. You resolve to try this with tomorrow's problems. You edge nearer to a stall where 2 merchants are untying one of the larger loads. The rope comes off, and a smell like the world's most expensive closet lifts into the air. Raw silk, still carrying the faint ghost scent of the workshops it left weeks ago. Fold by careful fold, the fabric shows its quiet luster under the brazier light, not glittering so much as breathing light in and out. A scribe settles with a ledger nearby, dip pen at the ready. He writes with the economy of someone who has learned that ink is cheaper than time. From Kashgar, one trader says, as if answering a question you hadn't asked. 2 passes closed, 1 opened, the sky unsure if it wanted to snow or applaud. Historians still argue whether the lion's share of trade through Samarkand at its peak was silk and spices, or whether metals, horses, paper, and glassware together outweighed the famous luxuries in value. Tonight the argument is mercifully theoretical. What matters is that the goods have arrived, and so have the stories. A cookhouse off the courtyard begins to perform its nightly miracle. Steam curls up from a line of copper pots. Onions surrender their pride to the pan. Flatbread reappears, this time blistered and glossy with a brush of oil. You're handed a tin cup of watered yogurt with salt and mint, the kind of drink that convinces your throat to forgive your dust intake. Someone tosses a joke about how the bread in Samarkand is so good that even the camels pray facing the ovens. The camels, to their credit, pretend not to hear. You drift with your cup to an open patch of wall where a map has been chalked by a board guard, a web of roads snaking out to names that make your pulse hop. Bukhara, Merv, Bulk. The lines are thin, but the distances behind them loom large in your mind, like the shadow of a mountain just out of sight. Debate time again. Historians still argue whether Timur's rebuilding projects made transit here faster by enforcing road repairs and policing, or slower by funneling trade into state-favored routes with more stops and tolls. Standing here, feeling the gate's solid timbers at your back, you suspect the answer is, it depends on whether you wore the right badge. A handler near you is reorganizing the load of a particularly self-expressive camel, humming a tune that zigzags like a caravan trail between minor and major. He unhooks a string of tiny bells from the pack and checks each one against his ear. Another quirky detail you didn't know you needed. Some caravans tuned their bells to complementary intervals, so the herd made a kind of traveling music, part practical, you can hear if a bell goes missing, part morale, the desert sings back. You try not to look too enchanted, fail immediately, and earn a nod that says, yes, the bells are the point. An older woman in a plain indigo veil sits on a low stool by the brazier, unrolling small bundles wrapped in waxed cloth. Inside are medicinal odds and ends, dried fennel, something that might be Asafoetida's grumpy cousin, and a honey mixture she swears quiets a nervous stomach faster than prayer. She gives you the kind of once-over that mothers learn and merchants adapt. You look mostly intact, only mildly underslept. She prescribes a pinch of something bitter and a slice of bread, which, to be fair, is your preferred health plan anyway. Nearby, a young guard practices the art of standing still without falling asleep, leaning just enough on his spear that he could pretend it was intentional if anyone asked. He catalogues you as traveler, curious, harmless, probably a talker, and returns to counting the breaths between distant dog barks. Overhead, the sky is an inkwell, and each star a fleck that escaped the brush. The Sarai's upper rooms throw out tiny rectangles of lamplight and the murmur of low voices, figures settling, trading news promising to continue in the morning when math and money make more sense. You circle back to where the merchants have laid out sample wares on a rug. There's a stack of paper that crackles like thin snow. Someone jokes that it's as dear as a poet's self-esteem, and the poet from the tea house is nowhere to defend himself. A small glass bottle holds something the color of a parrot's envy. A trader swears it's the finest indigo from far away, and he'll demonstrate on your sleeve if you don't move soon. You consider lending your sleeve to science, then recall the fate of that melon earlier and keep your wardrobe undecorated. A sudden hush spreads from the gate, a latecomer. The door sighs open just enough to admit a lone rider and a pack horse draped in canvas. The rider dismounts with the wincing grace of someone whose spine has filed official complaints. He carries a narrow, wrapped bundle as carefully as if it were full of sleeping bees. The head handler meets him halfway. There's a rapid exchange of names and places. You catch only fragments. Riverford, bandits 2 days back, a bridge like bones. The bundle is set on a table, unwrapped partly to reveal the lacquered corner of something that gleams even in stingy light. No one says the word instrument or astrolabe or icon, but the air nuzzles around it with curiosity. This is what the Sarai does best. It concentrates the road, the dust, the news, the hazard, and hope into one safe bowl for a night. The animals settle, the people loosen, reputations and prices drift toward their true level. A boy runs past carrying a bucket and an exaggerated sense of hurry. A man with ink on his fingers yawns, so wide his ancestors could see it. Somewhere in an upper room, dice clatter, then stop on a silence that suggests either triumph or ruin. You glance up to the balcony, and catch a slice of the night beyond the walls. The sky stroked with a slow-moving cloud. You think of the tiles at the Registan drinking the last light, of the tea house steam, of the prayers' echo climbing the alleys, and now of this, the Sarai's held breath, the inventory of a world paused between departures. A handler walks by and pats a camel's neck. "Easy, judge," he says to the beast named He Who Judges. The camel grunts, magnanimous. You attempt the same gravitas with your own eyelids. By the time the brazier's coals have melted into a low red sea, the courtyard has grown calm enough that you can hear the faint slap of rope against a wooden post. Rhythm, steady as sleep. The watchman on the gate coughs, once, theatrically, to remind the knight he's in charge. The knight, being agreeable, does not argue. You tuck yourself into a shadowed corner, the stone still warm from the day, and let the Sarai's exhale wrap around you like a borrowed blanket. Tomorrow, the arithmetic of trade will resume. But for now, the sum is simple. You are here, you are safe, and the road, for the length of a breath, has stepped off your shoulders. The courtyard's quiet turns into a kind of low, breathing hum as you wander toward the side wing, marked by a painted sign you can't read but somehow understand. This is the merchant's counting room. It's tucked away from the stables and sleeping quarters, shielded by thick walls that muffle the rest of the Sarai's night. A single oil lamp burns above the door, its light catching the edges of an iron latch, worn smooth by countless hands. Inside, the air is cooler, heavy with the scent of parchment, ink, and something faintly metallic. Silver coins, probably, but you're willing to believe it's just the smell of ambition. Around a low table sit 3 men and 1 woman, each with a ledger open in front of them. Their quills scratch in near unison, the sound like tiny footsteps across a frozen pond. The woman pauses to blow on her ink, then slides a small stack of coins across to the man beside her without a word. Historians still argue whether medieval Samarkand's counting rooms were run more by trust or by a silent understanding that betrayal would be swiftly dealt with. Judging by the measured glances here, you suspect the answer is both, depending on how far you can run. In the corner, a younger clerk is tallying bales of fabric by touch, his eyes closed, fingertips reading the silk's thickness like braille. Quirky tidbit: some experienced traders claimed they could tell the region of the origin for certain silks by the temperature of the thread against their skin. Whether that's skill, superstition, or a bit of sales theatre is anyone's guess. You find yourself drawn to a low bench by the wall, where a silver scale sits waiting for the next deal. Its pans gleam in the lamplight, and the tiny counterweights, shaped like turtles, fish, and even a miniature camel, look like pieces from some elaborate game. A merchant notices your interest and chuckles. "Weights make men honest," he says, "or at least give them less room to lie." He tips 1 pan and lets the balance swing, the chain links clicking softly. A tall man with a weather-creased face lays out a piece of paper covered in cramped writing and circles 1 line with a fingertip. "Merv's tax up again," he mutters. "By the time we cross, we'll owe them a new roof." Another replies, "Historians will one day argue whether that road was built for trade or for tolls." You smile at the phrase, a familiar refrain tonight. The deals themselves are mostly quiet affairs. A nod here, a hand pressed to a ledger there, a small clink of coins dropping into a cloth pouch. One merchant unwraps a tiny parcel to reveal lapis lazuli, so blue it looks like a fragment of the night sky was trapped inside. Another produces a rolled parchment, its wax seal intact, sliding it into a coffer with a sigh that sounds like relief. From outside, faint hoofbeats and a creak tell you another animal is being settled. The counting room barely reacts. These walls are meant for business uninterrupted. The lamp flickers as someone opens the door just enough to slip inside. A younger man enters, his cheeks still pink from the night air. He places a small wooden box on the table, pushes it toward the older woman and sits. She opens it to reveal coins so freshly minted they still have a bite to their edges. The older man across from her makes a note, then pushes a tray of dried figs toward the newcomer. "Eat," he says, "before you forget which side of the road you're on." The room chuckles, a soft, tired sound that seems to carry the weight of hundreds of similar nights. Eventually, the pace slows. Ledgers close with a careful thump, coins vanish into satchels, and the scales pans settle still. You realize that in this small lamplit space, the lifeblood of Samarkand, its trade, its promises, its silent understandings, is being counted out, measured, and sealed until morning. When you step back into the courtyard, the night feels cooler, the stars sharper, as if the air itself has been tallied and approved. Somewhere beyond the wall, the city keeps breathing, but here, inside the Sarai, you're wrapped in the certainty that deals have been made, numbers have found their homes, and the road's wealth is, for now, safely asleep. You drift away from the counting room, following a faint rhythmic creak you can't quite place until the smell of warm oil and dyed fibers nudges you toward a narrow side passage. The air is heavier here, carrying that faint metallic tang of brass and the richer, earthier scent of silk that has been handled by careful, patient hands. You step through an arched doorway and into a low-ceilinged workshop, where a single oil lamp throws an amber halo over a loom that looks as if it could tell more stories than a poet on a caffeine binge. The silk weaver sits cross-legged on a worn mat, his posture straight but relaxed, one bare foot pressing a pedal, the other curled beneath him. The loom groans softly as he works, its wooden frame polished by years of calloused fingers and the occasional head bump from bending too close. Threads shimmer in the lamplight, a deep indigo warp with a pale gold weft that flashes like liquid sunlight when the shuttle slips through. Historians still argue whether Samarkand's weaving patterns in this era were imported wholesale from Persia and China, or whether local artisans synthesized their own hybrid style. Watching the fluid certainty of his hands, you'd swear he's carrying every tradition at once, as if his fingers have diplomatic immunity. A boy, probably his apprentice, squats beside a skein of crimson silk, methodically untangling it, while humming a tune so tuneless it becomes its own kind of music. Quirky tidbit: some medieval weavers believed that singing, even off-key while winding silk, would keep moths from chewing it later. Whether the insects were deterred by the sound or by the sheer audacity of human belief remains undocumented. You notice how the weaver's focus never breaks, not even when the boy asks him a question about whether gold thread should be doubled on the edge. His answer is calm, measured, and probably identical to the one he gave yesterday and the day before. The work here is less about invention than perfection, a repetition so refined it becomes art. Against the far wall, rolls of finished fabric rest like sleeping snakes, each tied with a strip of cotton and marked with a small wax seal. The colors are mesmerizing: emerald, lapis, pomegranate, ivory, and the patterns range from tight geometric lattices to swirling vines that seem to climb off the cloth. You resist the urge to run your fingers over them. This is wealth you measure by sight alone. The weaver pauses just long enough to sip from a small brass cup, then leans back in, eyes narrowing slightly as he examines a section under the lamplight. Satisfied, he sends the shuttle through again, the loom's wooden voice blending with the boy's mumble song and the occasional sigh of the oil lamp. For a moment, you let yourself imagine the journey of this cloth, rolled carefully, loaded onto a camel, carried over mountains, unrolled in a distant market where someone will gasp at its sheen. Maybe it will become part of a wedding robe, maybe a palace wall hanging, maybe just another bolt in another merchant's counting room. But here in this small lamplit space, it is still only potential, a promise being slowly coaxed into existence. The boy finishes untangling the crimson skein and loops it over a wooden peg with a little flourish, clearly proud of himself. The weaver glances up and gives the smallest nod of approval, which, judging by the boy's grin, might as well have been a parade. You take that as your cue to slip away, not because you're unwelcome, but because there's something almost sacred about this rhythm, and you'd rather not break it. Back in the corridor, the cooler air greets you like a splash of water. Somewhere beyond, you hear the muffled thud of gates settling and the low bark of a watchman calling to someone out of sight. The Sarai is folding further into night, but the loom will keep working until the oil runs low. Because in a city like Samarkand, the road never really sleeps. The sound of the loom fades into the stillness as you step back into the courtyard, now steeped in that deep, velvety darkness only a walled city at night can hold. You wander toward the heavy timber gates, drawn by the muted glow of 2 lanterns hung just high enough to paint the arch in trembling gold. The great doors themselves stand closed, their surfaces carved with geometric knots that seem to twist into infinity, a silent reminder that this city has been guarding its own sleep for centuries. 2 watchmen pace slowly before the gates, their shadows sliding over the stones in long, deliberate strides. One carries a spear tipped with polished iron. The other has a short bow slung across his back, and a quiver of arrows that click faintly with each step. Neither man speaks much, but they exchange the occasional nod, not so much to communicate as to reassure each other they are still there. Mainstream historical fact. Samarkand's city gates were traditionally shut at night during much of its medieval history, partly to deter raiders, partly to enforce curfews, and partly, so some chroniclers claimed, to keep rival city spies from slipping in under cover of darkness. A stray dog curls itself into the corner of the gatehouse, head on its paws, eyes open just enough to let you know it's watching. Above, the narrow windows in the towers blink, lamplight like drowsy eyes. Quirky tidbit? Some medieval gatekeepers swore that the best early warning system wasn't the guard posts at all, but the stray animals who lingered there, the dogs, cats, and even pigeons that reacted before human ears could catch trouble. You step closer to the gate and run your hand along the cool iron of a locking bar as thick as your arm. It smells faintly of oil and old wood smoke, as if every evening of its life has been marked by the same ritual. Lanterns lit, gates drawn shut, bar slid into place. Through a narrow slit in the wood, you catch a glimpse of the road outside, pale under moonlight and utterly empty, stretching into the kind of darkness that feels older than the city itself. One of the watchmen sidles up, resting his spear against the wall. Quiet night, he murmurs, eyes scanning the horizon through that same slit. But it's always quiet until it's not. He doesn't elaborate, and you don't ask. Partly because you're not sure you want to know, and partly because there's something comforting in not filling every silence with words. The other watchman makes a slow circuit to the far side of the gate, stopping to check the lashings on a smaller postern door built into the massive frame. He tests the lock with a gentle tug, then taps it twice, a signal you suspect is more habit than necessity. Historians still argue whether these smaller doors were meant as a convenience for late arrivals or as a liability, since they were easier to force open in a siege. Standing here, you decide it's both a risk and a mercy in equal measure. Beyond the gates, the faintest wind stirs, carrying with it the smell of the steppe, dry grass, cold earth, and something almost metallic. You imagine the road rolling out to other caravanserais, other cities, other gates standing in their own patches of lamplight. Somewhere, a caravan is still moving under the stars, aiming to reach here by morning. The stray dog sighs and resettles, tail thumping once against the stone. The watchmen resume their pacing, lantern light sliding over their shoulders like a second uniform. You take a final look through the slit, letting your eyes adjust to the horizon until it's little more than shadow and suggestion. As you turn back toward the courtyard, the gates loom behind you, like the closed cover of a book you'll open again in the morning. The city is sealed for the night, its stories tucked safely inside, for now. You leave the gatehouse with its patient dog and measured footsteps and follow a ribbon of cooler air that slips between walls like a secret. It leads you to a narrow wooden door you might have missed if not for the faint notes of a flute drifting from behind it. Someone has hung a sprig of basil above the lintel. The leaves brush your hair as you duck through and step into a courtyard that feels like the city's exhale. Here, the night opens like a flower. A rill of water threads through the paving, whispering to low basins where petals float, rose and orange blossom, so the air tastes faintly sweet. Lamps hang from branches by thin cords, their flames rocked by the gentlest breeze, so the shadows ripple like silk. You sink onto a cushion beneath a pomegranate tree, and the bark is cool against your back. If you were any more comfortable, you'd have to tip the tree. Across the courtyard, a small audience gathers around two men in pale robes and a woman with a veil the color of tea at sunset. They're not on a platform. They don't need one. The words do the lifting. One poet smooths a page with the edge of his hand and begins to recite in a voice that sounds like honey discovering gravity. The other two listen, with faces that manage to be both serene and competitive. The classic poet look, I adore your craft and will defeat you with kindness. The verse curls into the air, full of gardens, wine cups, and nightingales who seem suspiciously good at metaphor. Historians still argue whether gatherings like this in medieval Samarkand leaned more Persian, Turkic, or Arabic in language and style, or whether the city's poets happily braided all three into something that belonged to Samarkand alone. Hearing them, you get the feeling the answer is whichever rhyme landed best. A server tiptoes around with cups of sharbat. He sets one by your elbow, rose water, and a whisper of mint, and it goes down like a small apology for every bad drink you've ever had. Quirky tidbit: some hosts perfumed their courtyards by tucking tiny wicks dipped in aromatic oils into the bases of lamps. As the oil warmed, the scent drifted up, and guests praised the naturally fragrant evening while the host nodded modestly like a man who had absolutely not engineered the atmosphere. You glance at the nearest lamp, and yes, there's the telltale little curl of scented smoke. The first poet pauses, and the second rises, eyes bright like someone who has been saving a particularly sharp couplet for a rainy day and found rain in his pocket. His poem starts with a lamp swaying over a gate and ends with a caravan bell echoing in a dream. That earns you an involuntary smile because you've heard those sounds tonight. The veiled poet laughs softly at a clever turn, and her laugh is the kind that lingers in the air like a watermark. A night breeze ferries the smell of damp earth and crushed basil. Somewhere outside the walls, a camel mutters a complaint that could be about oats or existentialism. Inside, the audience settles deeper. Someone snaps a pomegranate open with a practiced twist, and the seeds gleam like rubies scattered across a dark plate. You fish one between finger and thumb and let the sweet tart pop wake your tongue before the words lull it again. Between recitations, the talk loosens into the sort of half-serious debate that poets love as much as rhyme. Is the moon a mirror for the human heart or a lantern for travelers? A scholar with ink on his cuff argues for mirror. A man who smells faintly of horse votes lantern. You, with your recent experience of birth, decide it's a mirror that occasionally clocks in as a lantern on weekends. Someone quotes a famous couplet about lovers and roofs. Another mutters that lovers should invest in taller walls. Three polite laughs bloom and fade. Mainstream fact time, tucked in like a lemon slice. Samarkand, particularly from the 14th and 15th centuries onward, fostered famed courts and madrasas where scholars and poets found patronage. Ulugh Beg himself was not just a ruler, but a noted astronomer who studied alongside poets and theologians. In a city where numbers measured stars and words measured longing, courtyards like this could balance both equations. The veiled poet rises, and the courtyard adjusts itself around her, as if to improve the acoustics. Her poem begins in the market, shutters falling, spices cooling, then slips through a tea house, bows to the call to prayer, and arrives here, under these lamps, with a line about pomegranate seeds that makes the server stop in place for a beat. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't need to. The syllables move like water along the rill, finding every turn without hurrying. By the time she reaches the couplet, even the small fountain seems to hesitate between drops. Applause here is soft, hands meeting the way moth wings do, and you join in, resisting the urge to holler like you're at a wrestling match. A young man leans toward you and whispers a translation of the last line. If sleep won't come, teach it the road to me. You file that away for future nights when your brain wants to list every bad decision since the melon. A cat strolls in with the owning confidence of a landlord inspecting late rent. It hops onto the empty corner of your cushion and curls into a comma, claiming your left hip as collateral. You reach to scratch its neck. It tolerates you for 3 seconds, then decides your service is adequate and resumes being a punctuation mark. The server pretends not to notice, or perhaps the cat is on the payroll. Conversation drifts to rumor, a visiting scholar who reads the stars without squinting, a shipment of unusual glass from far to the west, a baker who has discovered a way to keep bread soft until midday, immediately suspect. Historians still argue whether the culture of poetic riddles and repartee functioned as a kind of social sieve, letting information pass safely in metaphor while the literal facts stayed put. You suspect the city survives on 3 lubricants: oil for doors, tea for pride, and poetry for everything unsayable. Someone requests an old favorite, and groans of pleasure go around like the collective memory of a tune. The first poet obliges with a piece about a night watchman who sings to his keys. You think of the gates, the iron bar, the dog's sigh, and feel the poem settle into your bones like a bedtime story for your grown-up nerves. 3 light jokes sneak in. The poet says the watchman's songs keep thieves away, lovers awake, and neighbors nostalgic for silence. You don't so much laugh as breathe out in that half-chuckle that belongs to people who are already a little sleepy. By now the lamps burn lower, their flames shorter, their light warmer, honey turning to amber. People stretch discreetly, a yawn skips around the circle like a friendly ghost. The server gathers the empty cups, and the cat, having completed its audit, departs to supervise a different cushion. You feel your spine lengthen against the tree bark, and your eyelids practice the long blink that is 90% nap. The veiled poet closes the night with a brief quatrain, the kind that walks into your mind and politely rearranges the furniture. When she finishes, the garden seems to grow a fraction larger, as if the walls had exhaled too. Everyone lingers, reluctant to be the first to stand, until the fountain resumes its confident burble and the spell lifts like a lid. You rise with the others, returning cups, offering small words of thanks that feel surplus to the obvious. At the door, you pause to look back. The lamps swing, the petals spin slowly in their basins, and the pomegranate tree holds the night in its branches like a secret it's willing to share. You slip into the alley again, carrying a line of verse in your mouth like a sweet seed, and the city receives you with that particular Samarkand hush that says, "The hour is late," and the next wonder is a few quiet steps away. The alley unwinds in slow curves, and with each turn the air seems to thin and cool. Somewhere ahead, A dark silhouette rises against the star field, a shape both familiar and improbable, like a crown balanced on the horizon. You know it before you're close enough to see the details. Ulugh Beg's observatory. Even in sleep, the city keeps one eye on the heavens. The street leading to it is quieter than most. No shops, no tea houses, just high walls on either side, punctuated by small shuttered windows that glint when they catch the lantern light. Your footsteps sound almost too loud here, so you slow down, letting your sandals kiss the stones instead of slap them. Historians still argue whether the observatory was considered sacred ground or simply a particularly prestigious workplace. But everyone agrees it was one of the most advanced astronomical centers of its age. As you crest the last rise, the structure reveals itself fully. A circular tower pale in the moonlight, its walls banded with faint geometric patterns that seem to shift as you move. Above the entrance arch, carvings of stars and astrolabes seem to shimmer when the clouds part. You approach the door, a heavy slab of carved cedar, and push it open with the sort of hesitation one reserves for entering both a library and a cathedral. Inside, the air feels cooler with the faint mineral tang of stone that has been handled for centuries. Narrow steps lead up in a spiral, the kind that make you wonder how many robes have brushed these walls, how many minds have climbed them, with questions buzzing like lantern moths. Quirky tidbit? Some accounts claim Ulugh Beg himself would walk the city at night, stopping strangers to quiz them on astronomy, gifting silver coins to those who answered well, and perhaps an awkward cough to those who didn't. You emerge onto the upper platform and suddenly the city falls away. Samarkand's lanterns are scattered below like an echo of the stars above. The horizon is clean and sharp, the kind of visibility that makes you feel both infinite and minuscule. The night smells faintly of dust and distant gardens, and the breeze plays with the edge of your robe like a bored cat. From here, you can see the dome tops you passed earlier, now pale and ghostly in the moonlight, and the black ribbon of the road slipping out toward the steppe. You think of the caravan tucked safely in the Sarai, the weaver at his loom, the poets in the courtyard, all nested under this same canopy. A voice murmurs near the far side of the platform. You turn to see two scholars bent over a low table, on which an astrolabe gleams like captured moonlight. One points toward a cluster of stars while the other adjusts a brass arm, the soft click of the instrument punctuating their conversation. They speak in measured tones, the cadence almost like prayer, but their eyes are sharp, calculating angles and distances with the ease of someone counting familiar steps. One glances up at you and gestures toward the sky. "The Pleiades," he says simply, as if naming an old friend. You follow his finger and find them, 7 faint points stitched into the dark. Historians still debate whether medieval astronomers leaned more toward purely mathematical observation or infused their charts with astrological meaning. Judging by the small smile on the scholar's face, you suspect they saw no contradiction in holding both in the same gaze. The other scholar adjusts the astrolabe again and marks something in a ledger with a thin reed pen. The scratch of ink is almost lost in the quiet. You wonder if this observation will join others in the great catalogues. Precise, neat records that will outlive every step you've taken tonight. You rest your hands on the cool stone of the parapet, letting the silence sink in. From up here, the city's heartbeat is a distant hum, and the stars feel close enough to pluck like the strings of a rhubarb. The scholars return to their work, the astrolabe glinting with each small movement, and you turn your gaze outward, following the sky's slow wheel until the constellation blur into something softer, more human. You drift closer to the scholars, drawn by the faint glow of their lamp and the precise, almost tender way they handle the astrolabe. The brass disc catches the light in small bursts, a star here, a horizon line there, as if it's collecting the night in pieces. One scholar steadies it while the other adjusts the rete, that spidery framework of pointers tracing the positions of known stars. His fingertips are careful, reverent, like he's coaxing music from an instrument. They speak softly, their words threaded with numbers and names. Alcyone, the older one says, marking a note with the point of his reed pen. Meridian in. He trails off, glances at the younger man, who checks the alignment and nods. Historians still argue whether these nightly vigils were purely about mapping celestial positions for navigation and calendars, or whether they carried a streak of divination, reading omens in the way planets threaded through constellations. Watching them, you sense the answer was probably yes to both. Because who could stare at the infinite without wondering if it was also staring back? The younger scholar pauses to stretch his neck, his gaze lifting from the instrument to the sky itself. No clouds tonight, he says, almost to himself. You follow his gaze and see the great belt of the Milky Way laid bare above you, a smear of silver dust, dense enough to make you believe the old stories of spilled grain or the pathway of departed souls. The air up here feels lighter, as if it's been thinned by starlight. Quirky tidbit: some medieval astronomers swore that certain stars had audible voices if you stood in the right place at the right time. Of course, they usually meant the low hum of wind in observatory stonework or the faint echo of your own blood in your ears. But the idea stuck, and poets ran away with it. The older scholar tilts the astrolabe toward you, perhaps sensing your interest. Here, he says, the sky in your hand. You take it carefully. It's heavier than you expect, and peer through its frame. The delicate metalwork frames a scatter of points, the grid and horizon lines, making the infinite look momentarily manageable. The scholar chuckles quietly. It is not that the stars are many, he says. It is that they are patient. You hand it back, and he resets it with the ease of long practice. The younger one scribbles another figure in the ledger, his handwriting neat even by lamplight. You imagine that ledger filling slowly over months, each line a frozen moment from some distant night, a cosmic diary kept in numbers instead of words. From your vantage, the city below seems to pause in its breathing. You can still make out the faint glow of the Registan, the occasional lantern bobbing through an alley, and the darker stretch of the Caravan Sarai's roofline. Every piece of it feels connected to this quiet work. The traders who navigate by stars, the poets who borrow them for metaphors, the watchmen who count them to measure their shift. One of the scholars gently covers the lamp with a small bronze lid, dimming the platform to near darkness. The stars sharpen instantly, as if they've been waiting for this moment to show their truest selves. A breeze curls past your cheek, carrying the scent of cool stone and something faintly herbal, maybe sage from a garden below. You tuck the image away, the astrolabe gleaming faintly, the scholars leaning over it like conspirators in the oldest mystery, and the whole sky watching, patient as always. Descending from the observatory, you find the city in that tender interval when even shadows seem to sleep. The alleys are cooler now. Mist gathers in corners like thoughts you meant to finish hours ago and set aside for later. Your feet know where you're going before you do, down a lane that carries a faint, impossible promise on the air. Warm bread before dawn. The smell is shy at first, just a ghost of yeast and heat. Then it rounds the corner and taps you on the shoulder, like an old friend who refuses to let you pretend you're not hungry. You follow it to a squat building with a low door and a roofline that looks like someone smoothed clay with the flat of a giant hand. No sign, no flourish, just the steady glow of firelight leaking from a vent and the rush and sigh of air being fed to flame. Inside, the bakery is a world within a world, heat stacked in layers. The floor warm underfoot, the walls perfumed with flour and smoke. A round clay oven sits at the heart of the room, like a sleeping animal that snorts embers. The baker, forearms dusted white to the elbow, moves with the silent rhythm of someone who keeps time by sunrise. He glances up and nods you in, the kind of permission that says, if you can stand the heat, welcome to the quietest party in town. On a low table lies a parade of dough rounds, each one dimpled in the center, edges thicker, a pattern printed with an iron stamp, rosettes, stars, tiny whorls like the tiles you were admiring hours ago. Quirky tidbit, some bakers stamp loaves with designs that double as signatures. Regulars swear they can pick their family's bread out of a crowded stall by pattern alone. You reach to touch a stamp and feel the faint coolness of metal against your fingertips, then pull back before you baptize it in flour. The baker scoops up a round, flips it between his hands like a slow coin toss, and leans into the tandia, the clay oven that sunk into the floor like a well of fire. With a long paddle, he slaps the dough against the inner wall where it clings instantly, as if gravity took a coffee break. The oven breathes a tiny woof, and the surface bubbles in little blisters you can practically hear. Historians still argue whether Samarkand's famous non owes its particular texture more to the mineral profile of local water or to the oven's architecture and firing method. Tonight, your vote goes to yes, with honorable mention to the baker's wrists. He reaches for a shallow dish of seeds, sesame, nigella, and flicks a few into his palm, sprinkling them over the next disc with the care of a jeweler, setting stones. A second baker, younger and still earning his flour freckles, tends the fire with a hooked iron, drawing coals around so the heat stays even. Their conversation is minimal and cheerful. Ready? Turn. 2 more. You offer to help by standing out of the way. They accept your contribution with professional seriousness. Mainstream fact, folded in like butter. Bread in Central Asian cities wasn't merely staple, it was ceremony. Travelers broke it as greeting, deals were sealed over it, and superstitions clustered around it like sesame. Don't drop it, don't step on crumbs, don't cut it with a knife if you can break it by hand. In some homes, a piece left from dinner would be tucked into a niche, so no one leaves hungry. A custom half practicality, half quiet vow. You watch the baker lift a baked round free with a curved iron and lay it, steaming, on a reed mat. The smell is the argument and the conclusion. The young apprentice uses a small wooden press to dot the center of the next loaf, making a delicate constellation of holes that will keep the middle from ballooning. He shows you proudly how the pattern matches a larger stamp hanging on the wall, repeating motifs everywhere tonight, from mosaics to poetry to bread. You're about to call it cosmic when the oven exhales and the baker grins. Cosmic, yes, he says, but also breakfast. Heat licks your cheeks, sweat gathers at your temples and dares you to complain. You don't. The baker moves in a cycle, old as fire itself. Shape, stamp, seed, slap, lift, a choreography of muscle memory. He prefers silence to chatter, but allows one joke each time a loaf falls off the wall too early. Your contribution, the bread heard dawn, was late and decided to sleep in, earns you a veteran's nod and a crumb the size of a coin, which, when you taste it, converts you from philosophy to religion. From a back shelf, the apprentice retrieves a small crock wrapped in cloth, and when he unties it, the room gets a little brighter even though the lamp doesn't change. The starter within, sour and sweet, alive and entirely unimpressed by your awe, bubbles quietly. Historians still argue whether medieval bakers in Samarkand kept starters by family over generations or reseeded often due to heat and travel. The apprentice, unbothered by centuries of academic dispute, feeds his with practiced reverence and says, "She's my grandmother." You resist the urge to say, "Congratulations on the family," and settle for a bow toward the crock. A third worker, no older than the apprentice, eyes bright with the certainty of dawn, arranges finished rounds on wide willow trays. He stands one tray by the door where a deliverer will collect it at first light, then begins stacking others for the morning bazaar. You recognize several patterns already: the stamped rosette, the lattice, the ring of dots like a small galaxy. Somewhere a poet from the courtyard might write a metaphor about that. You settle for the simpler truth that everything in Samarkand seems to rhyme. Tiles to stars, stamps to constellations, ovens to sunrise. The baker offers you a loaf too hot to hold and a pinch of salt on your palm. The crust crackles like kindling. The interior pulls in soft strands, glossy and tender. You tear, breathe, taste, and everything you've done tonight, from the lanterns to the watchman to the camel named He Who Judges, lines up behind this bite and nods as if to say, yes, this is why. 3 light jokes flit through. You burn your fingers, try to pretend you meant to do that. You blow on the bread like it's a baby bird. You declare, solemnly, that you're a bread critic now and require a second sample for science. The bakers approve your methodology. The room's heat makes its own weather. A ribbon of steam trails from each new loaf. The air tastes of caramelized flour and the faint bitterness of char. On the far wall, a cracked tile has collected fingerprints over the years. A gallery of heat-flushed hands that needed a brief anchor. You add your own print, purely for the pleasure of belonging for a second to a line you can't see the ends of. A lull comes. Just a sliver of stillness between batches. The apprentice leans his head against the cool edge of the doorframe. The fire ticks as a split log settles deeper into coal. In that quiet, you imagine all the routes this bread will travel in the next hours, to a porter at the gate, to a scholar climbing steps to the observatory, to a poet who will break off pieces as she edits a line until it finally clicks. There's a rumor, whispered like a spell, that Samarkand bread stays soft longer than any other, keeping caravans company for days. Historians still argue whether that's chemistry or bragging rights baked into civic myth. You shrug toward the oven. Let the chemists and the braggers fight it out. You've met the fire. When the next round of dough is ready, the baker doesn't need to call you. Your hands have already lifted to help steady the tray. For a breath, you share the rhythm, a borrowed beat in a very old song, and the city that has been humming all night turns up its volume just a hair as dawn tests the edge of the sky outside. You step back into the pre-dawn chill, with the bread's warmth still ghosting your palms, and the air feels suddenly enormous, the kind of space that makes every sound stand out. The city is quieter now than at any point you've seen. The silence almost ceremonial. Then, from somewhere down the long main road, you hear it. The slow, deliberate shuffle of hooves and the creak of leather straps. A small caravan is assembling at the Sarai gates, the courtyard inside lit just enough to see shapes in motion. You slip in as the gatekeeper works the bar free with a low groan, the massive timbers shifting reluctantly. Traders move with the unhurried focus of people who have learned the road doesn't care about your schedule. Better to be steady than swift. One man adjusts the saddle blanket on his camel, humming something that wanders up and down a scale, like it's in no hurry to find home. Another tightens the rope around a bundle of wool, testing it twice with a tug that says he's lost loads before. Mainstream historical fact. Caravans often left in the cool before sunrise to take advantage of low temperatures and maximize distance before the midday heat. The rhythm dictated not by clocks, but by sky and climate. Quirky tidbit: some seasoned merchants swore by carrying a departure loaf, fresh bread from the nearest oven, as a good luck charm to ensure the journey ended in profit. You notice one man has a round of bread tucked into his pack, the stamped rosette still visible. You silently wish the oven's blessing follows him across every mile. The camels kneel to be loaded, grumbling in that way that sounds both ancient and deeply personal. The air smells of hay, animal musk, and the faint sweetness of figs being stowed away in a pouch. A boy barely more than a shadow in the lamplight, scurries from one animal to the next with a water skin, splashing just enough into each bucket to keep tempers even. The gatekeeper leans against the frame, watching with the faint smile of someone who has seen thousands of departures and knows the story only ever changes in details. You watch the lead trader, a woman in a faded indigo scarf, check her inventory on a small wax tablet, scratching marks with a stylus that looks like it's been carved from camel bone. She glances at the sky, then at the horizon beyond the gate, as if reading something written out there only she can see. The first hint of light brushes the highest dome in the distance, turning its tiles from shadow to a muted blue. The caravan begins to move, each camel rising in turn, the line forming as naturally as a river finds its course. Hooves thud softly on the packed earth outside the gate. Bells jingle in irregular harmony. One of the younger handlers catches your eye and grins, the kind of grin that says he's awake too early, but proud to be part of something moving. He walks backward a few steps, waving, before turning to follow the line out into the dim stretch of road. Historians still argue whether the departure of caravans was treated as a public spectacle or a simple fact of life. From where you stand, it feels like both, quiet enough not to wake the city, significant enough to stir a little ache in your chest. The gate swings inward again, the bar is dropped back into place, and the courtyard exhales into stillness. Outside, the sound of the caravan fades to a soft, irregular heartbeat, then disappears entirely into the pale edge of morning. You step back into the lane with a strange mix of satisfaction and envy. They're going somewhere, you're staying here. But tonight has taught you that staying can be its own kind of journey. And besides, the city isn't done with you yet. The first light is creeping fast, and Samarkand has one more transformation to show you before sleep finally claims you. The eastern sky is beginning to glow, a slow spill of gold that seeps into the inky blue above the rooftops. You find yourself back on one of the main avenues, the stones cool underfoot, the oar holding that fragile balance between night's hush and the day's first stirrings. The domes you saw at sunset are different now, their turquoise skin drinking in the new light, edges gilded, mosaics softening from mystery into clarity. A vendor is already arranging figs in neat pyramids on a low wooden cart, even though no customers have passed yet. He hums to himself, maybe to keep the rhythm of his hands, maybe to tell the quiet that it's time to start letting go. Historians still argue whether medieval Samarkand woke slowly like this or snapped into life as soon as the gates opened. The truth, you suspect, is that the city wakes in layers. First the bakers and water carriers, then the traders, then the swirl of voices and barter and life. You wander toward the Registan, now almost unrecognizable from the lantern-lit square you saw hours ago. The facades are catching the full attention of dawn, each tile flickering between shadow and fire as the sun edges higher. A boy runs across the square with a basket of bread rounds, the stamped patterns catching the light for just a second before he disappears down an alley. Quirky tidbit, some families swore by buying the very first bread of the day, believing it carried the luck of the oven's first flame. At the far end, a water seller fills his goatskin bag from a public spout, the water splashing with the confidence of a river that has no idea how important it is to a city like this. He glances at you and nods, his face open in the way of people who've decided that a smile costs nothing and might just make someone's morning better. The air is changing. You can smell fresh straw where a porter is rebedding a mule, the faint sweetness of dates being unloaded, a trace of last night's smoke fading as the wind shifts. The sound changes too. Footsteps multiply, shutters knock open, voices carry farther. Somewhere, a hammer starts tapping in the steady rhythm of a craftsman, picking up exactly where he left off yesterday. You pause in the middle of the square, letting the scene fold around you. The night you've walked through feels impossibly distant now, like a dream you know was vivid but can't quite hold on to without closing your eyes. Every detail, the call to prayer, the caravan bells, the loom's creak, the poet's laughter, has settled into the city's stones, leaving you with the quiet satisfaction of having been part of something that will keep happening whether you return or not. A rooster crows from somewhere close, the sound sharp against the soft morning hum. Sunlight pushes higher, and the tiles blaze for a heartbeat before settling into their daytime phase. People begin to fill the square, some hurrying, some drifting, all moving with the unspoken choreography of a city waking to its own rhythm. You take one last deep breath of the cool air, now edged with warmth, and feel the weight in your limbs. Not unpleasant, just the pull of sleep finally catching up. The night has been long, full, and patient with you, but now it's time to let it dissolve. You turn toward the quieter streets that will lead you to your bed, knowing the city will go on without you. And that's part of the beauty. The path narrows as you leave the heart of the city, the sounds dimming behind you like a tide drawing back. The sunlight hasn't quite reached these lanes yet, so the walls still hold the night's coolness, and the shadows stretch longer than they will in another hour. Your steps slow without you meaning to, the edges of your vision softening as the rhythm of walking turns hypnotic. Somewhere a door closes gently, the click barely louder than the rustle of your own clothes. A cat pads along the wall's top, its tail curling lazily, then leaps down without a sound. A breeze lifts from behind you, carrying the faintest traces of everything you've passed tonight. Cardamom, bread, smoke, stone, each scent fading into the next until you can't tell where one ends and another begins. You find a bench under a narrow balcony, draped with vines, the leaves trembling slightly in the morning air. Sitting, you let your shoulders drop, feeling the last of the night's tension flow away. Your eyelids grow heavier with each slow blink. The colors around you soften, and the sunlight that finally reaches the spot feels like a warm hand resting lightly on your face. The city is awake now, but in this little pocket of stillness, it feels far away, like a gentle hum behind a closed door. You can still hear a single bell in the distance, maybe from the last camel of the caravan you saw, or maybe from another leaving today. Either way, it's a sound that belongs to motion, and you're finally still. Your breath deepens, the shadows sway, and as the warmth seeps in, you let go completely, carrying the night's journey with you into sleep.